Welcome to episode 2, History in a Bombshell. We could probably call this one Killing Hitler. Maybe Bill O'Reilly's working on that book, but actually, I think he's probably working on a book called Killing Myself. Yeah. This is a German Mauser. We'll be talking about this in a minute. What if you had a time machine? This is usually a question I ask my class at the beginning of the year. And I say, what would you go back and do? And I got a lot of different answers. Because people think that if you go back, you can change the events of history. And, okay. I get things like the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King, going back and stopping that assassination, Abraham Lincoln. I even sometimes get the whole, I'm going to go back and get some numbers like Biff and, Back to the Future, make millions of dollars. But there's always one that I get that always shows up, and that's going back in time and shooting Hitler, killing Hitler. And you get any number of ways they want to do it, whether it's before World War I and, before he becomes dictator, or before he kills all the Jews, which is a generic long-term thing. There's no one date where he's like, we're killing the Jews. But I always challenge their time machine idea. And I challenge it because of reasons like the 1936 Olympics. Here you go. The Olympic Games were awarded to Berlin, Germany, back in the 20s, I think, well before Hitler came to power. And here he is. He's leader of Germany. And everyone now is deciding whether or not they really want to let Hitler host these games. And the reasons have to do with the anti-Semitism that his party, as of 1935, legally did to the Jews, which is the Nuremberg Laws, stripping them of their citizenship, therefore voting rights, certain jobs, education, and things like that. And this prompted a huge boycott from the world, mostly led by the United States. And so here we are, the high and mighty United States, flaunter of the rights of man and bringer of democracy to the world. And we're trying to advise Germany how to treat its people. So here's Hitler being lectured by Franklin Roosevelt of the United States on how to treat his people. So the USA says to him, Hitler, you have a society where Jews are not allowed to hold government jobs, where they're not allowed to intermarry with members of the white race, where Jews aren't allowed to use certain bathrooms or go to certain restaurants, where they're not legally allowed to attend certain cultural events, and in some cases aren't even allowed to call themselves German anymore. And you know what Hitler's response was? I learned it from you, Dad. You taught me how to do this to people. Because we're hypocritical. Here we are, the USA treating the African Americans just as bad as Hitler was beginning to treat the Jews. In fact, Hitler was simply copying the United States model of separation of races. So here's your useless time machine. Because if we go back and kill Hitler, would it have been someone else? If not against the Jews, would it be against groups like the Armenians again? Or the Kurds, worse than what Saddam tried? Or would the 1950s white Americans have decided it was time to deal with an African American problem they thought they were facing? Let's not kid ourselves, folks. Killing Hitler may have saved millions of Jewish lives, and depending upon when your time machine goes back and does it, millions in a war. But then would Israel exist today? Without these wars, would Armenia have been granted a country? And what would the Kurds do to give up for theirs. Ask them. Actually, ask them now. They're attempting to do it right now in northern Syria, southern Turkey. And the Turkish government, led by Erdogan, dictator, may make moves against them in the future as well. And it'll look exactly like the Holocaust. So I believe an event like the Jewish Holocaust is literally a reality check to the rest of the developed nations in the world. And we thought groups like us, the United States and Europe, had this all figured out after the war. But this is smack dab in the middle of things like the Tuskegee experiments. Not to be confused with the Tuskegee Airmen. That was a group of African American pilots who, I believe, had more successful missions than any other group in the World War II military. No, the Tuskegee experiments are when the United States was secretly injecting syphilis into African American males and then following them for 30 years to see what it would do. Secretly. The men that this was done to had no idea it had been done to them. They thought they were part of some new cure or drug, and they were being tested for it over the 30-year period of time. We didn't find out about this as the public, guys, until the 70s. And it's not because the government wanted to tell us. It's because of a whistleblower. Someone made it clear to us in society that this was happening. So, come on. A country predominantly white, the United States back then, in the 40s and 50s, there was a clear movement of minorities in large parts of our country. And with the right or wrong leader gaining power, we, the United States, the amazing United States, could not have fallen for the same thing the Germans did. If you were to ask the German people today, if they truly realized what was happening and could have seen the end game, had they would have really been, oh, okay, yeah, we see what's going to happen. We definitely do not want this tainted in our history. Germany's been coming back from this for 70 years, attempting to own up to it and make it better. They were a modern country, folks. People like Einstein were coming out of there. So when it comes down to it, this is something that could happen again. You have groups like the KKK at the time that are gaining members and power, and apparently they're gaining them again today. We had people in camps as well. We didn't call them concentration camps because that's too Nazi sounding. We called them internment camps. And if you were Asian, because we didn't trust Japanese people, you went in one of those. So let's take our red, white, and blue tinged glasses and follow me for a minute and look internally. We learned a lesson from Hitler. The world learned a lesson from Hitler. Lessons like immigration problems. We solved that problem today? I don't believe we have. When people move around, there are problems. Just ask an African today or a Syrian about that one. Do they care that we already exist as a country and that we may not want extra people in it? No, they don't want to die. They want to live. And so they take a chance and cross the Mediterranean or fly out of this war-torn country. What about revolutions? Ask an Egyptian or a Libyan how that's going. We thought, 8 years ago in the Arab Spring, hence named the Arab Spring, that this movement of democracy would be a wonderful thing, but democracy, maybe the United States has realized this in the past year. It's an interesting thing. What do the people really want? So we teach in school that revolutions are quick and easy. It's like a paragraph in the book. If it's the French Revolution, maybe it's a few sections, one chapter, tops. The French Revolution was like 12 years, 1789 to early 1800s, when you have technically Napoleon surrendering Waterloo. That's not easy. Hundreds of thousands of people die in that period of time. And then they go back to having an emperor. It's interesting. So we forget these few paragraphs. The German Revolution in 1848, Italy, Francis II Revolution, South America, we barely talk about all those revolutions. And we, at the moment, are handling those issues today. What about the children fleeing from these societies, whether it's revolution or, immigration in general? What about them? Ask a child from Aleppo how that looks. Back in 1938, back to the Holocaust, there were Austrian Jewish children, and out of the blue, the German government, having taken over Austria, allowed just the children to be sent to a different country if the country accepted it. And of course, everyone gets together of the world and starts talking. In the United States, there was a bill that they were attempting to pass. A female senator had to be the one to do it because, God forbid, men care about children back then. And so it got lost in our system. No one followed through and voted for it. There's only one country that did. That was Great Britain. And there were thousands of Jewish Austrian children that left their families on a whim. They didn't know what was going to happen to the Jews. They just knew that a British family at the moment was safer than an Austrian one. And so in the kinder transport, these children got on a train and then were boated over to Great Britain. Most, 99%, would never see their family members again, their parents. Now, have we taken any Syrian children in here? And I don't think we even know what the war is really about in Syria. We know there are rebels and there's a government, and we don't support the government. So it's easy to say we don't need to involve ourselves. But then we see a picture of a boy lying face down in the sand, and all of a sudden we care. And our way of showing support to this boy and other Syrian children is to click the word share on Facebook or Twitter and say, this is appalling. And in a way, sometimes that is a useful way of spreading information, but you've done nothing, really. All we've done is talk. No one's afraid to step up and deal with these problems. And maybe we can't. Maybe they are so normal a problem that they have to happen. We all pretty much hope someone else will do something about these things. And don't we all usually say, shouldn't we have done more? Shouldn't we have done more for the Jews? I can't believe the United States didn't take more of them. Well, once we go to war with Germany, technically they could be German spies. It's all politics. So, maybe you should care about Syrian children. Maybe you should care about people in South Africa. Not the country, but the part of the continent, sub-Saharan Africa, where all these political problems are taking place. Where people are fleeing groups like Boko Haram, terrorist groups, just as bad as this ISIS we're terrified of. And what about terrorism? What about a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip? Remember him? The teenager who so-called started World War I. A Serbian young man who, had we just stopped him from committing his terrorist attack, over 30 million people would have survived this great war. Now, most historians, you should know, we know this war was happening anyways. They just needed something to kickstart it. He was the kickstart, the spark. So Gavrilo Princip, a terrorist to us, to the most of the world. If you were to go to Serbia today, you'll see a statue of him, bronze. And the statue is him holding a pistol in the same position he was when he shot the Archduke, and unfortunately, as well, Sophie. A statue. His footprints used to be in cement before they were removed. He's a hero. Serbia exists today because of his firing that gun. Would they take it back? Would they say, we didn't mean for World War I to start, but you can have our country back, Austria-Hungary? Someday will there be ISIS footprints somewhere? Will we be seeing a statue of someone holding a knife and beheading this unnamed figure? We have to fight an idea by not demonizing it. Now I'm going to do a whole show on terrorism. It may not be on history and Bombshell because this is going to strictly focus on the World War II. But we make these mistakes over and over again. Terrorism it works. You can't stop something that works. Now, thankfully, ISIS as a political group is about to disappear, we hope. Otherwise, it's showing up in the Philippines, which is just interesting. But we judge these people in the past, who we think were more decent than we were. But I think we are, as a world today, way more passionate and understanding than even 70 years ago. So how do these things still happen in a post-World War II world? You'd think, after the Holocaust and World War II, all the terrible things that we've done to each other as human beings, that we'd be rid of it. No, it's because we love to forget. We love to forget and we love to ignore problems until they're so big that they are a world war. Because then it's easier to handle. It's less political. It's more gritty. Good versus evil. We will have another Holocaust. It may not be Jews. This time it could be the Palestinians. It could be the Armenians again. It could be the Kurds, for sure, if things continue. It could be over cultures. We find these differences between ourselves. And since they exist, these differences, there will always be times that we will look at them as differences and exploit them to promote our own group, whether race, culture, religion. And if it hadn't been Hitler back then, Mussolini would have done terrible things. Francisco Franco, a guy who Mussolini and Hitler loved and helped gain power, is going to keep it because he does not join the war on the Allies' side. He did some terrible things in Spain till he died in the 70s. I believe he died. If it hadn't been them, Franco would be the demon during this time period. So go ahead. Get back. Go get in your time machine. Go back in time. And I usually tell the students, tell me, if it's all on Hitler, when would you do it? Tell me when. I want to know, when would you shoot Hitler? So when do you do it? I ask my students. I want to know. I want you to tell me a time. Tell me when you would take that gun, line up Hitler, fire. Would you do it, before he signs the documents that prompt the final solution in the Wannsee Conference? The legal document ordering the deportation, slave labor, and murder of millions of Jews? Just get there, right as he's about to sign it, and because he wasn't at that meeting. There were a bunch of SS members, and they all sit down, led by Reinhard Heydrich, I believe, and they decide what the final solution is. And many of those Nazis in that room stood up and said, stop for a second. Is this saying what I think it's saying? And Reinhard Heydrich was said to have been very clear on what was happening. Numerous SS members and Nazis leave this meeting. They can't verbally say they're against this, because this is where you get yourself shot and hung for being on the sides of the weak. So they leave. But the group that stays follows through. It's not just Hitler, folks. Okay, do you do it before he invades Poland starting World War II? You know, see him in his little Mercedes going down the street, going to sign the thing. By the way, it was months in advance that he said we're going into Poland. Actually, it was literally right after he signed the document saying he wasn't going to invade anywhere else, the Munich Agreement. Just line him up. There he goes in his Mercedes. Because, by the way, he was gunning for Russia. It was never about Poland. Poland was in the way. Poland was a bridge that he needed to cross before he could handle Stalin. And if France and Great Britain had not declared war on him, he would not have gone after France immediately. So, do you do it before he installs himself as dictator? 1933, he's appointed, not elected. He loses the election to Hindenburg. Hindenburg is bullied into appointing him chancellor, and then Hindenburg is going to die of old age, air quotes. We do believe it was as of old age. And Hitler will very quickly pass in the Reichstag, not inviting groups that would say no, only inviting his buddies. All he needed was 51% to show up, and they allow him to pass the thing saying he's dictator. By the way, in that election, the German people voted 40% for the Nazis to gain seats in the Reichstag. So even though I just killed Hitler, Joseph Goebbels would have taken over. Do you do it before he wins that battle with Joseph Goebbels over taking control of the Nazi government? Because it was close. And people like Heinrich Himmler were extreme. Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler were extreme anti-Semites. They hated Jews. Do you do it before he's allowed to speak publicly at his trial? He and the Nazis attempt to take over the Munich government. And they're stopped. And this is treason. He's arrested for treason, which usually is death, by the way. But the judge allows him to speak at his own trial. Order. And Hitler puts on a show. Such a good show that even the judge is swayed. People were cheering. The judge gives him a year. And he's going to be let out in 9 months for good behavior. Do you do it before the German government and the military after World War I gave him a job to speak to soldiers? They teach him how to speak in public, how to speak in front of large groups. That's one of his big traits. So as he's at that podium, about to speak to these Sturmabteilung, these old fighters of World War I, just line him up and fire. And then you have to deal with all those other men who felt that they could have won that war, that they felt betrayed by their country and the politicians running it. Or do you do it when he's in the hospital, having been gassed in the war? You know, laying there with his face all bandaged up, just on his little cot, just been like, look, I have to do this. I know you're injured and you just lost this war. You're going to find that out in a few minutes. I can't let you live. And then shoot an injured man. By the way, being gassed is the reason that he doesn't use poison gas in World War II on soldiers. He will, of course, use it against the Jews. Thank you, Sean Spicer, for that information. Why not shoot him, before he gets into politics? Just this 20-year-old walking around with pamphlets thinking, oh, I hate communists. And I think the Jews are the inventors of communists. And here I am with my gun and time machine. And I say, you know what? I'm going to get him now because he's starting to not like Jews. And just shoot him as he reads his political books. What about when he's a hungry teenager wandering the streets looking for food? And this is where he meets his first Jewish person, according to him, the first Jew he'd ever seen. And it's weird because I know a lot of teenagers that aren't doing very well. They're poor. They don't have a lot of food. People don't hire them for jobs. And they've also have these extreme predetermined ideas about certain groups of people that have been embedded in them by their parents. And I'm just going to line one of them up. One of these teenagers that thinks the world hates him. And just be like, look, this is for the benefit of the world. What about we shoot him as he finds out that he isn't accepted to architecture school? This dream, because I know teenagers and dreams. I still have dreams, like this podcast being famous. But all 52 of you that are going to watch it know you need a lot more than 50 people watching. Unless one of them's Bill Gates. I'm pretty sure he's not one of them. Do you just see this boy with his head down, having just been denied architecture school because he can't draw well enough, and he thinks that a Jewish boy got the job before him. And as he's walking with his head down, thinking that his life is over, just right in the head. It's for the benefit of the world, young Adolf. What if you shoot him before his parents die? This loving mother. Hitler was infatuated with her. And it probably was because she balanced out Dad. His dad beat the shit out of him. Hitler would be just beaten to a pulp, and then his mother would console him. That's when we should shoot him, before his parents die. Because when his mom dies, it's just him and Dad, and I'm not going to tell you how that goes. So here comes this bruised little boy out of his house. I'm just going to line him up and be like, look, I know your mom died. I'm sorry. And I know your dad beats the shit out of you and hates you. This is for the benefit of the world. And just pop him. Nature versus nurture, folks. I just saved us all. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. Or do you do it when he's a baby? You're in the hospital or the house where he was born in Linz, Austria, and you hear his mom screaming, giving birth, and you burst in the door and you say to this woman who just had her child, saying she's going to name him Adolf, and you say, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry. I have to do this. And you kill baby Hitler. Make no mistake, folks. You kill Hitler as a baby, lying there, just being born, well, that makes you Hitler.